As law enforcement works to eradicate violent racist extremists online and on the streets, what happens when hate-filled speech appears within the police force? Earlier this month, 3 North Carolina police officers were fired after a review of a patrol car video found the officers making racist comments. In the video, one officer said, quote, "Society needs a civil war to wipe them off the map," and discussed, quote, slaughtering black people using a racial slur. Meanwhile, 4 police officers in San Diego, California were placed on administrative leave last week for allegedly posting racist and anti-Muslim comments on social media. As police departments across the U.S. try to push ahead with reforms, can they root out racial discrimination in their ranks? Joining me now is the president of the Major Cities Chiefs Association and Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo. Chief Acevedo, 3 North Carolina police officers were removed from their post earlier this month for using racist language. Another 2 officers were given administrative leave in California for similar offenses. Now, would you have gone further? Is this enough?
Well, I'm not familiar with all of the circumstances, but the bottom line is we don't have room and we cannot tolerate racism amongst police officers. And so I will just wait to see what happens with that investigation. I don't know what the rules of engagements are, but we need to let the process take its course to make sure that a proper investigation is conducted.
But if racist language, Chief Acevedo, was used by your own police officers in Houston, would you have gone further?
Well, yeah, absolutely. We'd actually investigate. We just had a sergeant not too long ago that last month that posted something that was racist on social media, and we took immediate action. But we have to give them 48-hour notice before we can actually have a hearing with the police chief and the employee. And the day that he was supposed to come in after he was noticed, 2 hours before he retired from the police department. And so it depends on the circumstances, but we've got to have zero tolerance for racism.
But isn't the problem that too often some of these police officers are simply reinstated quietly after the dust settles?
Well, what part of the problem isn't that they get reinstated. I think part of the problem is that officers that are fired or quit in lieu of termination from one police department end up going to a second police department or a third police department. You know, there are these officers that just move from department to department to department, which is one of the reasons that the Major City Chiefs Association I'm the president of supports the establishment of a national registry, so we can keep tabs on these officers and they don't sneak in under, you know, in the cloud of darkness or under or in the middle of the night from one department to the next, because we need to keep bad officers off police departments so they don't damage our profession more than they do now.
And you said in the wake of the police killing of George Floyd that it created an awakening. Yet you also said that there was no systemic racism within police departments. But when you see, and that it actually saddens you when people look at race, you say we have to look at the actions of individuals. But when you see repeated evidence of violent racism against black people, can you deny that there isn't a pervasive problem of racism within the police department?
There's racism in society. There's racism around the world. Racism is not limited to police departments. There's racism and discrimination across the spectrum. Think about this. We have 800,000 police officers, 800,000 police officers in the United States on 18,000 police departments. If only 1%, just 1%, were what I call knuckle draggers, you know, people that are racist, that are biased, that are abusive, that's 8,000 police officers that are not doing the right things for the right reasons. Then you add the fact that we have a proliferation of cell phone cameras and public safety cameras and ring cameras, and the chances are they're going to be captured on tape. There is no context in terms of when we do something wrong, racist, brutal. No one's talking about the tens of millions of times when we do things right. So I'm not going to deny there is racism, because there absolutely is. There's bias. There's police brutality. But I also know, having been in police officer for 34 years, that if we had all the technology 34 years ago to capture the stuff that was happening back then, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation now because I believe we would already fixed policing. So there's a lot
Well, I'm not so sure. I mean,
of work.
you still say, Chief Acevedo, that it's just the 1%. No one is suggesting that all police officers are racist, but is it really a case of just one or two police officers, one or two bad apples? Isn't there a more sinister reality that many police chiefs know, that is a rather well-known, well-kept secret among police departments, and that is the fact that there is support among some law enforcement officers for white supremacist ideology. That's been well documented.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Look, we just had in our own department right here in this minority majority department in the most diverse city in the country, we had a cadet early on in the academy admit to another cadet that he was a white supremacist and he couldn't wait to go out and do harm to people of color. Well, needless to say, that person was fired immediately because the cadet that he told that to came forward as required by our policies. So don't get me wrong, there are significant issues with policing. But
that's one case, Chief Acevedo, but what's being done on a more systemic level? Because as you well know, the FBI has for many years now quietly investigated the infiltration of white supremacists within police departments. In fact, as you know, there's a 2015 classified FBI counterterrorism policy guide, which says, quote, that domestic terrorism investigations focused on militia extremists, white supremacist extremists, and sovereign citizen extremists often have identified active links to law enforcement officers. And of course, this follows another FBI warning in 2006, which raised the alarm over, quote, white supremacist groups' interest in infiltrating law enforcement communities. Has anything at all changed in the last 15 years?
Yeah, I think what has changed is that we've been able to actually look at a lot of our applicants' social media, being able to dig much more deeply into not only what they do, but the circles they run in. And I think that as a result, we've been more successful in actually weeding out people that have no business being police officers. But sovereign citizen movement, constitutionalists, people that might be even white supremacists or part of hate groups, they permeate society across the board. And that's why we have to continue to be vigilant. We have to continue to make sure that we do thorough backgrounds, and we have to continue to make sure that we as police departments across this country keep an eye on what people are doing, because when they do raise their head, sooner or later, they're going to raise their head, and we have to make sure that we detect hate, detect racists, detect white nationalists or any other type of hate group, because hate groups do come in other colors sometimes. We have to be. But
how will you do that, though, Chief Acevedo? Because it isn't illegal, is it, for anyone to join a hate group? Will you screen prospective new officers for membership in some of these groups?
If you're a member of a hate group, you're a member of a criminal organization, you're a member of a gang, you will not be hired by any legitimate police department. Whether or not it's your constitutional right, what that says is you don't have the right mindset, the right heart, the right attitude, or most certainly don't represent the values of mainstream police departments that want to be legitimate and that want to serve with legitimacy. So we can absolutely get rid of people for being parts of hate groups or associating with hate groups. It's something we will not tolerate. And I don't know of any department, at least in the Major City Chiefs Association, that's the 69 largest police departments in the country and 9 largest in Canada, that would tolerate having their members join those type of groups.
Chief Acevedo, as you say, and there's plenty of posts online as well, Facebook, that show the extent of this problem and have shown the extent of the problem over the years. But when you said recently during the recent protests that we're seeing that there are people who are not people of color who are coming into the city and other cities to actually start agitating and actively engaging in violence, what did you mean? Were these the same agitators that President Trump was talking about?
Well, I haven't seen the comment by President Trump, but I can tell you that we have to be vigilant. And what I love about the city of Houston, this big melting pot we call Houston, which is the most diverse city in the country, we have been a beacon of what this country should be about. First Amendment activity protected by the police department. But quite frankly, we know that there are agitators that will go in and try to hijack the legitimate protest, the constitutionally protected First Amendment protest of peaceful protesters by engaging in violence. And We know that's happened in other places around the country, and I can tell you here, having spent hours marching with peaceful protesters, that I personally was confronted by people from outside of our city, screaming and yelling and trying to agitate the crowd. And luckily for me, and luckily for our city, our residents recognized what was going on and they didn't buy into it. So we have to be vigilant. And I always tell peaceful protesters, when you see someone trying to hijack your movement, don't let them, because that will move the attention away from police legitimacy and brutality and racism or whatever other legitimate issue is to the actions of the protesters. So we all have a role in making sure we don't let these people do that kind of activity.
But can you tell if they're far right or far left agitators?
I can tell you that one of the things going on in our country, that there's extremists on both ends of the spectrum. And what people don't get when they're extreme, whether they're far left or far right, they have one thing in common. Guess what that is? They're extreme, and they're out of touch with the rest of the American people. So the number one threat right now, one of the biggest threats to our country right now, is violence from right-wing extremists. That's a fact. It's a bigger threat than the extremists on the left. But at the end of the day, whether you're extreme right or you're extreme left, your reasoning may be different, but they're both extreme and you're out of touch, and we all need to come to the middle and start working together to make this country better.
Chief Art Acevedo, thank you so much. Great talking to you.
You're welcome. Take care.